All right, my name is Matt Mattoon. I'm here with Dirt Bike Test today, and we're out here testing these 450 off-road race bikes. A little bit about myself. I am 26 years old, about 165 pounds, depending on how much I ate that day. And I describe myself somewhere around an intermediate rider. I'm not really a racer, more of a trail rider. I do a race about once every 8 years. So for me, these bikes are not something that I typically ride, so it was really cool to get this experience today. So for someone who doesn't really race regularly, my priorities are a little bit different. I'm a little bit more, I want to be comfortable while I'm going fast, not necessarily just go super fast. I know everyone wants to be comfortable, but for me, that's kind of a big priority. So that's kind of how I went ahead ranking these bikes. So the first one for me, and 1 and 2, it's almost a coin flip, but for me, the number 1 is going to be the Yamaha. Just because I really like the engine, it seemed very versatile. You could ride it in the low, mid, a little bit up top, but I found myself mostly riding in that low, bottom end to mid-range pull. And so I really like the power with that bike just because of how it would hit in that bottom end. It was pretty easy to ride for me, and it didn't necessarily want me to go fast in order for it to work well. And when it came to the chassis, I actually really enjoyed the chassis. It didn't feel as heavy as the scale says it does. It was pretty nimble, but also pretty planted at the same time. It had a really good balance. So between the two, being nimble and balanced. That low center of gravity is really comfortable for me to ride. My personal bike is a YZ250FX, so that could be why it's so comfortable to me. But even if I had never touched that 250, I think this still would be my number 1 bike for me, just because of how easy that power is to ride while still providing a lot. And just that chassis characteristics of being nimble, but also still being planted. Not too much of either one. The suspension for me, not being too fast of a guy, the suspension actually worked fairly well for me. I definitely felt like the smaller bumps, it soaked those up pretty well. And I could definitely tell in the bigger bumps, it was getting a little, it was starting to do things I wasn't too liking with the pitch and everything. But overall, it was good enough for me. You know, I'm not really going too fast down a straightaway, so that wasn't too much of a factor for me personally. The cockpit fit me pretty well. That was some complaint with some riders, but for me, when I hopped on it, it felt pretty comfortable for me. To me, the weakest part for this bike for me, I would say probably the braking. I felt myself having to pull just a little bit harder on the levers to get the bike to do what I was wanting to do going into a turn. Not so much that I was blowing past turns, but definitely something I was noticing as I was riding that bike. And also, I really like the power tuner on it. We had a map in there that was really smooth and really easy for me to ride it. Number 2 for me is going to be the Cowie. Like I said, it's pretty close to the Yamaha for me. This chassis, as soon as I hopped on it, it felt right at home for me. Like the rider triangle was good, the ergonomics were good for me. The front levers were a little narrow, but I got used to that, and plus levers are pretty easy to change out. So that to me was what immediately stood out on that bike, was just how comfortable it was for me to ride it. When it came to the engine, it was pretty. I would also say it was pretty versatile. I was liking it a little bit higher in the RPMs than with the Yamaha, but not so. I didn't have to be so aggressive that I was going over my head with the power of this bike. So it was pretty easy to ride still, and it was very nimble feeling. I really appreciated that about the bike. You could definitely tell it had a little bit of a higher center of gravity than compared to the Yamaha, which kind of made it a little too nimble for me, and that's what it essentially put it in second for me versus first. It wasn't quite as planned as the Yamaha, but if you're someone who really enjoys, being able to flick a bike and being in tight situations, it was pretty. I enjoyed that aspect of this bike. Having said that, even though this was a nimble machine, it still wasn't. It wasn't so. What's the word I'm thinking of? It wasn't getting pucked around so much. It was still pretty. It would still kind of go in a straight line or hold the corner. It just wasn't quite as planned as the Yamaha. The suspension, it was good for me. I would have liked it to soak up some of the smaller bumps a little bit more for me. But overall, it got the job done. It wasn't anything to write home about, but it wasn't super harsh. It wasn't super plush. It was somewhere right in between. Brakes were good on it, and overall, this is a really good bike. It wouldn't take much talking to get this bike into first for me. Just a little, I would have liked it to be just a little bit more planted, and that center of gravity just be a little bit lower like on the Yamaha. Third place for me, and this was a clear third, is going to be the Honda. For me, I actually really didn't like the Honda's first and third maps. I really liked their second map. It was the most aggressive, especially with that bottom end hit. That made the engine really fun and really lively. Whereas the other two maps, it felt like they were trying to do everything, but not too well, if that makes sense. I didn't really like them. However, having said that, this bike did have the most, it could be a trail bike and it could be a race bike feel out of all the four. So if you're someone who's looking for that, that could be a plus for this bike for you. The chassis was okay. It definitely felt rigid. I was describing it as point and shoot. It would still carve corners, but it definitely seemed to really enjoy a point and shoot style when it came to riding and navigating around turns and navigating around, tricky, tight single track. The ergonomics on this bike, they're comfortable for me. They weren't my favorite, but they were pretty comfortable to hop on and just start riding. Sitting or standing, it was pretty good for that. The big gas tank kind of would get in my way when I was trying to lean forward a little, in certain situations when standing up. That was something that stood out to me. And the suspension was okay. I would say it was just, I didn't really like it, especially in the bigger bumps or the smaller bumps. It didn't really seem to do anything all that well for me. Definitely would need a little bit more time to play around with the clickers and maybe some different spring settings for me with that bike. Overall, this bike it's not bad. It's just the characteristics don't suit me at all. I think if maybe you're a vet guy who's looking for something to trail ride on and do a little bit of racing, it's an option for you. It kind of does both of those fairly well in my opinion, but doesn't really excel in either area. Finally, for me, and this was it was pretty clear, last place for me is going to be the gas. The reason why I didn't like it is because it wanted to be ridden like a 250F or a 350 or even like a 252 stroke. It definitely wanted to be high in the RPMs for it to actually work. The low end power, it was pretty dead feeling almost when you would twist that throttle. It really you almost didn't get any kind of power at all until you started getting the higher in the RPMs. The suspension, it was, I don't know, it felt a little harsh for me. It wasn't really soaking up a whole lot. And then the rider triangle just felt really weird for me. I don't know if it was, I think it was because of the handlebars. It felt a little up, like the handlebars felt a little high for me when I was standing up on the bike and sitting down. The brakes on it were actually really good though, because I would accidentally go a little too fast to a turn and have to get on the brakes, so I got pretty acquainted with the brakes. And for me, as someone who's not really an aggressive rider, it wants to be ridden a certain way that I don't like to do. So for me, that's why the gas is probably my least favorite, just because it does want to be ridden aggressive. And so if you are someone who is looking to be, if you like riding high in the RPMs, then you'll actually love this bike. It's like a 350 but more power. But that's why for me, as someone who just wants something to hop on and feel comfortable, that's why it was last for me. So overall, I will say all these bikes actually are pretty good. If they all fit someone specifically, but broadly, the Yamaha is going to be my favorite just because it does have a really easy to ride engine. It has that tuning, and the suspension seemed to be pretty good. It was pretty good for me, and I really like the chassis characteristics. So that's pretty much it for me with Matt Mattoon with Dirt Bike Test, and yeah, we'll see you out there on the trails. Cheers.
If you liked what you saw in this video, come check us out over at dirtbiketest.com on the webs. We have bike tests, product tests, a lot of fresh dirt, and you can even support us by clicking through our links. Hopefully, we'll see you out in the trail.